not going to be his last game here. We're planning on playing more games here this year, but we're not ready to call it. I'm telling you, we expect to be back here this year and play more games here.
That's right. Carlos Mendoza called his shot. The Mets will be playing at least a home playoff game as they stun the Brewers in Milwaukee to move on to the NLDS. We have you covered here, of course, on the Mets Pod. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, drop us a mailbag question with that review. Watch us on YouTube and also ask mailbag questions in the comments under the show there as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And that is right. The Mets are moving on to the NLDS in one of the most stunning endings to a Mets playoff game in the entire franchise history. Joe, I don't even know where to start. I am just so happy we are here and we are continuing to talk about this magical 2024 New York Mets season.
Unbelievable. Just every time you think this team is done, and they have been done 5,000 times in 162 games, and every time, and coming down to that last inning, and the offense just, we're going to go through the whole series here, but for just tonight, the offense more or less lifeless for 8 innings. Francisco Lindor is the only guy getting hits. Nobody can touch any of the Brewers, the starter, obviously, or the relievers. And then, of all people, Devin Williams, one of the very best closers in the game, gets the top of the order. Francisco Lindor works from a 1-2 count to a walk. And then Nimmo, big single him to third. And Peter Morgan Alonso, what we've been calling for about 3 months to come up big in this spot. And it is the biggest spot of his career. And to your point, Connor, probably one of the biggest spots in the history of the Mets franchise in the playoffs. Just unreal. And man, I'm glad to be recording a podcast at midnight.
We'll be turning back the clock and starting with, how we got there. But I think we have to kind of start with the moment that essentially ended it all. And it's so funny how this sport works, right? This is a guy all year that it felt like the moment kept finding Pete Alonso, right? Every big moment throughout Met games, runners on, need a run here, don't even need a base hit, just need a sac fly. The moment kept finding Pete Alonso, and it felt like way more often than not, unfortunately, this year, and it wasn't like this for many years, Pete Alonso could not answer the call. And it was so frustrating for the Met fan because Pete has been here through a transition of an era, right? He was the guy that when he came up as a rookie and that Mets season didn't end the way it wanted to, but a reason a lot of people liked going to the ballpark that year was to watch a rookie Pete Alonso hit over 50 home runs. And he was kind of one of those guys that you looked at being a core piece of the turning the corner and establishing different pieces around him, like a Francisco Lindor, going out and getting a Starling Marte, and along the lines of that in 2022, where they came up short. And it's amazing how fast time goes, Joe. The Mets are entering a new era. They have the right people at the top of this organization, as we said, Steve Cohen, David Stearns, Carlos Mendoza. But it's Peter Alonso's walk year. It's really just incredible how sometimes time or timelines are not always on your side in sports. And we don't know if Pete Alonso is going to be a Met for the long term. That's not what we're talking about on this show today. But what we do know is Pete Alonso got one more chance to change the narrative of potentially his final season, or just how important this season is to the Mets franchise as a whole. And like you said, Joe, against a guy that is essentially untouchable in the major leagues right now. I mean, Devin Williams is so good that this Brewers organization felt like it was okay to trade a guy like Josh Hader. That's how good Devin Williams is. And what does he do? He just demolishes one opposite field, an absolute scorcher with 2 guys on to take the lead in a moment that truly felt like a movie. I mean, you could put the Moneyball music under that at-bat.
Someone already did.
And of course they did. That's the power of the internet right now. And it would blend perfectly. And now the Mets get a chance to make the season even more special. And we'll get into all of that. But there haven't been many moments in my Mets fanhood that have felt like that.
No, definitely not. And just everything that Pete's been through, because we talked about it all season, how he's struggling with runners in scoring position. He can't hit anything off speed, especially breaking balls. That's not what Pete Alonso always was. And I think because of how it's been this year, I think some people have this like thought in their head that Pete Alonso is just quote unquote not a clutch player. Like, I don't think that's always been the case. This year is kind of just amplified because it was his walk year and it was especially poor. But him staying back on that changeup, and we know how filthy the changeup is that Devin Williams has, and just staying back and taking it to right field, that was Pete Alonso of 2019. That was Pete Alonso of 2021, 2022. This year was a lot of everything's pulled. Everything's pulled. His home runs were pulled. His ground balls were pulled. This was staying back and just letting the ball travel and taking it the other way. And he is such a strong guy. He can do that all the time, and he will hit home runs. Just super proud for him because we're upset about it as Met fans. Pete Alonso didn't want to struggle all year too. So I am proud for him just to be able to come up in that spot to move the Mets forward. And we don't know where this season is going to go. It could end next week. It could go through the World Series. But the fact is, Pete Alonso extended this season, and credit to him. And, a lot of other people that we'll talk about throughout this show and that were factors in this game, but nothing bigger than what Pete Alonso pulled off.
Right. And, the point is, Joe, a guy that has sunk a lot into this organization gets a moment that will last a lifetime, right? But I think something I don't want to escape us on this podcast, because right now we are all celebrating not only the Mets win and Pete Alonso's moment, is how we got there. And how we got there, to me, while I can't sit here with a straight face and say to everybody it's just as important as Alonso's home run, it's pretty dang close. Because this team, on a night where we didn't know what we would get with what's left of the arms that were available, got 6 scoreless innings from Jose Quintana, who, listen, there was a lot of opportunities for this Brewers team. And at one point, sitting there, I kind of had this feeling of, it feels like the Brewers are having what happened to the Mets in Game 2, that they are wasting so many opportunities on a night where there was a point in this game, I believe maybe 6 innings into the game, where Francisco Lindor was 2 for 2, and nobody else in the Mets lineup had a hit. It just felt like no matter what happened, forget getting a hit, the Mets couldn't draw a walk to get on base. They had no answer. But a credit to this Mets team, starting with Quintana and then moving through a lot of different arms. Yes, Buto comes in and he gives up the 2 home runs, and it's devastating. There's no denying that. But Edwin Diaz finds a way to come in and completely stop the bleeding. And in the moment, as a Mets fan, maybe you don't appreciate that because you're sitting there and going, I can't believe we just lost 2-0 to the Brewers. We had this series. But when you look back on it now, stopping that bleeding is the difference of the Mets moving on to the NLDS. That's a giant moment for me. Francisco Lindor working out a walk on a huge at-bat against one of the best closers in baseball because he knows a home run doesn't mean anything there. He just needs to get this thing started, shorten the swing. Brandon Nimmo with 2 strikes, getting a single to keep the inning going. And then David Peterson, closer David Peterson, with a 2-run lead. And I skipped over Starling Marte driving in Jesse Winker for an insurance run that, let's be real, yes, the Mets won 4-2, so that insurance run isn't going to be looked back on as a historic moment. That allows a guy like Peterson to go on the mound and pitch a little differently because you're not one mistake away from the game being tied. Now you could be a little bit more aggressive. And Peterson was aggressive. He gives up the single, but then he got a double play ball, and that's what David Peterson does. So this was a team win. Just everything about this team encapsulated in one win that moved them on to the NLDS, that all hands on deck. And when Budo didn't have it, somebody else picks him up. Somebody else cleans it up. And then in the 9th inning, when they were their backs were against the wall, nobody really tried to be a hero until Alonso had to be. And that was the difference in the game.
absolutely brilliant stuff from Jose Quintana. We know he's a guy that pitches to contact, so he's going to give up base hits. He's going to have guys on base, but his ability to consistently work out of jams, which, great point by you mentioning game 2. It felt like the Brewers played the Mets game 2, where they had guys in scoring position. They had runners on base seemingly every inning, and Quintana just kept getting out of it and kept getting out of it. And huge credit too to Carlos Mendoza. I was ready to pull Quintana after 5. I was like, hand
Me
up.
too.
I felt fortunate to get the 5 shutout innings from him. And not only did he send Quintana out, he sent Quintana back out to face 3 right-handed hitters. And that is just the definition of what Mendoza has shown to be all year. And, we can debate the decisions that were made in game 2. Should he have pulled Minaya, and, should he have had someone ready to take out Phil Maton? But what he did in game 3 was what Mendoza has done all year, which is knowing when to stick with the starter and knowing the right time to pull. And he managed the Quintana situation perfectly, got that extra inning. Buto's been so reliable for this team, but this is a guy that is a starting pitcher that doesn't bounce back well quickly like standard relievers do. So he threw 2 innings 2 days ago. Not exactly comfortable on just 1 day rest, but he took the ball, and unfortunately it didn't work out. He gave up the back-to-back home runs. And at that point, everyone listening to this show had a deflated feeling. I felt in that moment, I was like, that might just be it.
Right. Sometimes you're
in
out
my
of
head.
gas.
Yeah. I was like, that might just be it for this team. And Edwin Diaz coming in, and, he was a little wild, a little erratic, put a couple guys on, but the job he did should not go undermentioned, because you could have put anybody else in that spot. And sure, that meant the 9th inning had to be somebody else, but you had to get to the 9th inning with a fighting chance. And putting Edwin Diaz in that spot to be able to do that is something that should not go unnoticed. And just a total team effort, as you said, Connor. Starting pitching, relief pitching, and the offense not doing much all day. But at the end of the day, you get 27 outs for a reason, and the Mets were able to obviously cobble together some runs. And Jesse Winker, stolen base, something that we talked about when the Mets acquired him, that this is kind of weird. Jesse Winker has stolen bases this year, and that stolen base leading to Marte's RBI single. And then post game in the locker room, you see Jesse Winker pouring the champagne on Lindor with an ice pack or a heat wrap or something wrapped around his back that's been bothering him. So this team is just, they're leaving it all out there. And as a Met fan, what more could you ask for?
That's exactly right. It feels like everybody's got something at this point of the year, but everything is on the line right now. And that's a great call out from you with Winker. I mean, this series felt very personal to him. It's about the loudest I've heard a player booed in quite some time, I must say. So it was personal. The helmet slam when he scored, you get passion. And this team is just dripping with passion. They have so much heart, and they leave it all out there, and they just never go out, sadly. It just feels like even this game, this was the perfect game where it's like, man, maybe you just don't have it tonight. Maybe you're just not going to be able to string together some hits. But at the end of the day, in the 9th inning, when their backs were against the wall, they found it. And even the last thing I'll say about this game, Joe, if you want to give some closing thoughts, feel free. Yeah. Even when Lindor fielded the ground ball, which I believe was from Terang.
It was Ichiro Terang. That's what he was this series.
He was a menace. He was an absolute menace. I don't think we've ever texted more about one player throughout 3 days. When Lindor charged that ball and took it himself to second base, I was like, what is he doing? This guy's going to be well past first base by the time he gets the throw across. And Lindor, one of the smartest baseball players I have ever watched play, just read it perfectly. He read it perfectly. And honestly, when I watched it back again, because Acuna was in at second at that point, that's a really tough turn for a rookie player, because he's still getting down the timing of Lindor tossing that, and he'd have to fully throw while turning. Lindor made the perfect play to end the game. And I know, once again, nobody will talk about that, but that to me just shows where the detail is with this team right now, right off the bat, I said that can't be the right move, and it was the perfect move by Francisco Lindor.
In the biggest moment of the game, obviously, because they're trying to hold this lead and not give it back. In the biggest moment, Lindor knew you don't flip it to the kid, you take it yourself and you finish this game yourself. And that is Francisco Lindor to a T. He knows he just knows what he's doing at all times, and doesn't matter how big the moment gets, whether that was his walk in the top half of the ninth or that play in the bottom half of the ninth. He knows what his job is at every single moment of the game. And man, be able to retire Bryce Terang in that way, who beats out everything and turns basic singles into doubles. And he got him, and it was not particularly close. Like it was close-ish, but it was clear as day out. Lindor knew what he was doing, and just incredible.
So let's we're gonna get into the NLDS here in just a little bit. I think it was time for a good long recap of what we just witnessed in the wild card round. And you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. So Joe, now as it lines up, as we see it here, we don't have a definite idea of who's going to take the mound for the Mets. It does sound like Tyler McGill is the leading candidate because, let's be real, the Mets have used a ton of their big arms to get through this series. So it's looking like when this series starts, it could be McGill. I would imagine the Phillies have Zach Wheeler lined up and ready to go. Of course, it's Zach Wheeler. It's at home. It makes too much sense. So listen, McGill has proven us wrong time and time again this year, but obviously the Mets are dealing with just a lot of arms are fatigued at this point at the start of a really, really tough NLDS against a division rival.
Look, you get a day off, and the Mets haven't had a day off in forever.
God,
so
do they need one? Ride the momentum.
They badly need a day off. What was that? 5 games in 4 days, with 3 of them being playoff games. Just
Phil Maton pitched in 4 of 5 days, by the way.
Just insane that they were able to pull this all off. Like, we don't even talk about it because no one wants to use it as an excuse. And Mendoza has said this, like, we're not using it as an excuse. But that whole travel situation from Milwaukee to Atlanta for the day, to play 2 games, to celebrate in Atlanta, to fly back to Milwaukee, to play 3 playoff games. Credit to them for being able to persevere through that. This series, did you know, I heard this, I think it was yesterday. Did you know this is the first time ever that the Mets and Phillies have faced in the playoffs? Ever.
That's very surprising to me.
Yeah. When I heard it, I was like, there's no way that's true. But it is true. The Mets and Phillies have never faced in the playoffs.
When you do think about it, it does feel like they go through opposite runs. Like sometimes the Phillies will be bad for a while when the Mets are competitive, and the other way around, plenty.
Yeah.
So it's not the craziest thing, especially when you also factor in them being in the same division. But I don't know. It's still surprising.
It's still crazy.
Like they played a lot of big games against each other.
Yeah, it's just it's crazy to say out loud. But look, these are 2 teams that know each other. It's different than facing someone like Milwaukee. Yes, the Mets just played them to end the season. But those teams don't really know each other all that well. They played on opening day, and then they played at the end of the season in this playoff chase. The Mets and the Phillies know each other. They know the tendencies of their hitters better than they would anyone else. I think this is going to shape up to be a fantastic series. And as you said, Connor, Tyler McGill, it appears, is the favorite to start game 1. Peterson pitching in the 9th tonight may have kind of knocked him out of consideration to starting game 1. You want to beat Philly? You might have to face Zach Wheeler twice. And that's something you just have to accept, and something
that's why they're really good.
Yeah, that's something you have to work your way through. Why they
go as far as they do.
And it is the thing, ever since this new playoff format, it's the rest versus rust thing, right? A lot of times, are the Mets in a better spot that they've just been playing this whole time versus Philly? Yes, they get to set up their pitching. They get to make sure their bullpen is well rested, but they haven't played baseball in nearly a week. It'll be 6 days, obviously, when the series kicks off on Saturday. And one of the biggest X factors, this is, I believe it was initially reported by Mike Puma, and others are kind of catching on. There's at least a consideration from the Mets to carry Kodai Senga on the NLDS roster. I don't know how I feel about that necessarily, but I mean, if you could tell me I could get 2 innings of Kodai Senga pitching in the 5-game series, I could find a spot for him at the bottom of my bullpen, I think.
Well, Joe, let me ask you this. This is pretty simple. Would you rather have potentially 2 innings from Senga or Max Kranick?
I would rather have 2 innings of Kodai Senga than Max Kranick.
Let me ask you this.
Probably Adam Ottavino.
I was just going to say, would you rather have potentially 2 innings of, obviously Kranick goes first, but then Ottavino? Right. I'm a definite yes on Kranick. I am a pretty close to the yes on Ottavino. Yeah. The only reason I'm a little hesitant on Ottavino is, listen, the Phillies are a really good team. Baseball's a funky sport. The Mets can get throttled in one of these games, and you need somebody to that's not Braziban to pitch all the innings. So I know people don't want to hear that, but the reality is sometimes you pack it up and say, we'll get them tomorrow, because that's the beauty of a playoff series, is that it doesn't come down to one game all the time. So, you know what? Once again, this is so difficult for us because we don't know where Senga is at, mentally and physically.
All we know is that he threw a 25-pitch bullpen session and everything was good, like a few days ago. So that's basically all that we know for a fact.
So, you know what's so interesting to me with Senga is there's really only 2 scenarios I would consider using him, and that's one as an opener for a guy like McGill. Because let's be real, the Mets are going to be stringing together that game, and it's not going to be easy because a lot of people have pitched the last couple of days that you'd like to use for that game. And then this one's more unrealistic because it's just a crazy scenario to drop a guy into, but with his stuff and how little he can pitch, if Edwin Diaz isn't available to close the game, I would throw Kodai Senga out there. But once again, that's not setting a guy up for success that has barely pitched this season. So
yeah, it'll be very interesting, but just something I wanted to throw out there for Mets fans that
it's real right now.
If you aren't on Twitter or whatever and you didn't see it, it is at least something that is in the discussions, and we'll see if it actually amounts to Senga being on the roster. But just another potential X factor for another crazy playoff series, like everything we've seen over the last few days. Is there any doubt that this is just going to be an insane series?
No, it's going to be absolutely nuts. And I mean, let's just all be thankful that Jake Bauers didn't end out of all the things to end the 2024 Mets. There's a lot of ways I could have stomached this season.
By the way, pinch hitting for Rhys Hoskins.
Yes. The Brewers, who are like the ultimate data team, pressing that button. It just absolutely. Rhys Hoskins, by the way, don't believe he had a hit in this series. Really good showing from Rhys Hoskins across 3 games. Did absolutely nothing.
Hate to see it. Really to see it.
A tough scene all around. All right, I think that wraps it up for us. Somehow we have done this, post game celebration. We've celebrated longer than the Mets. The Mets are probably finally sleeping at this point.
No chance.
Yeah,
not a soul on that team is sleeping
they deserve to celebrate this. Joe, closing thoughts before we hold on for dear life against the Phillies in the NLDS.
Man, incredible. Just such a shout out to this team, and what a year it's been. And I closed the last episode just talking about how awesome of a season it's been, and that is still the case. And I closed it last episode with, we'll be back for another one. And that's not just because the Mets pod never stops. You say that all the time, Connor, and that's a true statement. We're going to be back for another one. I can't wait for this series. And as much as they kind of dashed my hopes a little bit late in Game 3 tonight, I'm now all the way back in. And I think the Mets can win this series. I truly do.
Why not?
And I think it's going to go, it could go 4, it could go 5. And I don't know if we're going to do predictions because I don't think we're going to be on again. But I think the Mets are going to win this series and head to the National League Championship Series. And boy, I I'm excited. I can't wait. I have tickets. I will be at game 3 because the first game at Citi Field. So I will be in attendance for NLDS game 3, and I can't wait to be there. The environment's going to be electric. If tonight, when the Mets weren't at Citi Field, if the environment at Citi Field carries over to where the Mets are actually playing at the stadium, I just can't wait to be there.
I'm going to do everything I possibly can to be there Tuesday, right in the middle of football season. It doesn't matter. This is special. I was at a lot of playoff games back in 2015, and it's to this day some of my favorite sporting events I've ever been to. I mean, when it is October and everybody's out at Citi Field and that place is rocking in the crisp fall air, it is unlike anything else. And I am so happy that this team earned a home playoff game, because that alone is going to be so special. It really is. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. The Mets are going on to the NLDS to take on their division rival, Philadelphia Phillies. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you guys soon.